Let's have a look at Workspaces in Blender 4.0. In this video, we are going to have a look at each workspace and see what they are and why they are there. We won't dive too much into what any one of them do specifically, though. Workspaces are a way that you can change the way that Blender is laid out. Think of it like that. Each layout is a workspace that has sets of areas that have editors. You will find that when you are working on a project, you will want different workspace layouts for different purposes. From here on out, I'm going to refer to each layout as a workspace. Last time we looked at the left side of the top bar on the top here. Let's move farther to the right in this video. Each of these little tabs you see here are, well, tabs that let you switch between workspaces. You can also use the keyboard shortcuts Control or Command plus Page Up and Control or Command plus Page Down to cycle through each tab of workspaces. Double-click a tab to rename the workspace. You can open the context menu for a workspace by right-clicking on a tab. The context menu contains options to duplicate, delete, and reorder workspaces. Let's have a look at the default workspaces. Blender's default startup shows the layout workspace in the main area. This is what you see when you first open Blender with the default options. This workspace is a general workspace to preview your scene and contains the following editors: the 3D viewport on the top left, the outliner on the top right, and the properties on the bottom right, the timeline on the bottom left. Blender also has several other workspaces added by default. Here we have a workspace for modeling. You may notice that it doesn't seem to be all that different than the layout workspace. You could, in effect, get the layout workspace to look like this, as it is geared more strictly for using tools suited for modeling a 3D asset. But here, it is done for you by default. The Sculpting workspace. The Sculpting workspace is for working with modifying meshes. You are switched to the modifier layout. We can't do much as is for the moment, though, as sculpting is really just dragging vertices around. We need a lot more of them, which we will get to later when we get to talking about modifiers. The UV editing workspace. The UV editing workspace is for mapping of image texture coordinates to 3D surfaces. Scripted sprites, yeah, what does UV mean? Glad you asked. UV does not mean ultraviolet as you might have expected. If you are familiar with XY Cartesian coordinates, as I suspect you might be since we are working in geometrical space, then you might recognize that we have 3 axes that we can traverse. UV is like that. If we forget about the fact that we can travel on the z-axis relative to this cube, and the x and y axes relative to this cube, then what would happen if we took the outside of the cube and unfolded it? Now the cube itself is 2-dimensional. These axes would be x and y, but since we are talking about the unfolded surface of the cube, these axes are called U and V for the sake of clarity. The Texture Paint workspace. After we have unfolded our cube and had a chance to work with it, we need a way to prettify the UV map that we created. This workspace is for coloring image textures in the 3D viewport. The Shading workspace. The shading workspace is how we give life to our flat 3D models so that they can be colorful and have some depth. We will dive more into this workspace when we get to it. This is mostly for rendering. We will not use as much of this workspace during the actual design of our models. The Animation workspace. The Animation workspace is how we animate our assets. We can change their properties over time. The Rendering workspace. The Rendering workspace is where we render our assets out for purposes outside of Blender. Here we can view and analyze the rendering results and tweak things as it goes. The Compositing workspace. This workspace is for combining and post-processing of images and rendering information. The Geometry Nodes workspace. The Geometry Nodes workspace is the really cool one. It is for procedural modeling using geometry nodes. The nodes are kind of like programming without the writing out all of the spaghetti code. I am personally excited to get to working with this as well. The Scripting workspace. The scripting workspace is similar to the Node workspace and allows you to interact with Blender's Python API and writing scripts and managing things programmatically. Now that we have moved through each tab for each default workspace, you can click the plus icon over here to add a completely new workspace, or restore a default one that you may have deleted. Blender has a couple additional workspaces to choose from when adding a new workspace, such as a 2D animation workspace. The 2D animation workspace is a general workspace to work with grease pencil. The grease pencil you will also find to be quite neat. A 2D full canvas workspace. This is similar to 2D animation but contains a larger canvas. VFX options that you can append to the current workspace, such as masking, which for creating 2D masks for compositing or video editing. Motion tracking, for calculating camera motion and stabilizing video footage. Video editing, for sequencing together media into one video. The workspaces are saved in the blend file, which is the project itself. When you open a file, enabling Load UI in the file browser, which we can see by toggling this gear here, indicates that Blender should use the file's screen layout rather than the current one. And lastly, you can save a custom set of workspaces that can be saved as a part of the defaults. If you have configured the workspaces that you like or help your workflow, feel free to save them or load the defaults by going to File, Defaults, when choosing the best option for your needs. I will be sticking with the defaults for now, but feel free to do as you please. That's all for this video, so please be sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching all the way through. See you next time.